Hey everybody, welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk about Australia for Wines of the World, and this is for video 305, of course, at Folsom Lake College. Okay, Australia, what a wonderful place. Our outline for tonight is we're going to talk about the wine culture and fun facts, of course, the regions and climates of Australia's winemaking regions, the varieties that are popular and you can find there, and then some denominations and laws for the wine in Australia. So Australia, it is actually the largest wine producer in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a fun fact. They are really known for a lot of state-of-the-art systems and equipment. Everything is highly automated. So like they were one of the first countries to really adapt machine harvesting, as you can see in this upper right photo. So there wasn't a lot of labor for picking grapes in vineyards, so machine harvesting has become very, very popular over there. You can find some machine harvesting locally, like Amador County does some machine harvesting, but because of our really steep slopes here in the Sierra foothills, most of our fruit is harvested by hand. So machine harvesters will not do very well on steep slopes, and they will also not do very well in like muddy conditions. It can get stuck. And fun fact, you don't need a special license to operate and drive a machine harvester, which is really crazy. And these things are really cool. They're very, very, very large. You can see the operator just sitting in this little window right here. And then this vehicle drives over the row. There's these little bristles that come out and they knock the fruit off of the vine. And then it goes through a system and it gets stored in like these wings that are also pouches in the back of the machine harvester. And then when it's time for the fruit to be emptied out, they raise kind of like Lamborghini doors, I guess. And then all of the fruit pours out of it and it goes into a bin or it gets pumped into a tank. So machine harvesters are very cool if you get a chance to see one up close. So yeah, Australia was one of the first to really pioneer accepting that for their harvesting process. Oddly enough, as foreigners, as we see kangaroos as being very cute and something that we want to see, they're actually a vineyard pest. They will go through and eat all the fruit off the vines. They're very tall, they're very big, and they can do a lot of damage. And they can be very aggressive as well. Interestingly enough, when we talk about winemaking in Australia, the philosophy is much less on the concept of terroir, from France, and much more on blending skills from grapes extending over large territories. So the thought process is the more blending, the more complexity, the higher the value, the wine. So opposite thought process, but there is legitimacy in both, right? It's just perspective. One of the famous quotes we have here from a director of winemaking in Australia is, "Great wine is born not in the vineyard, but in the brain," which I think was really interesting. I do have a video for you guys here about machine harvesters if you'd like to see more. They're very cool pieces of equipment. They're very fun. Okay, and then before we dive into the winemaking regions and climate and all these things, we definitely need to give a shout out to the natives of Australia, right? And that is the Aboriginal people. If you don't know about the Aboriginal people, they are actually the oldest living civilization in the world, which is madness. The Aboriginal people are known to have occupied Australia for at least 65,000 years, which is just amazing. So a lot of wine districts are named from the native Aboriginal people, so from that culture. So you'll have Coonawarra, which means honeysuckle, Mudgee, which means nest in the hills, and Padthaway, which means good water. So these are regions of winemaking in Australia that have been named from the native people, which is cool. Okay, top wine regions of Australia. So Australia is quite large, right? It's split into different states or territories. We have Western Australia, we have the Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales, and Victoria. We're going to focus on a couple of regions, but as you can see directly from this map here, you'll see that we have wine regions. They typically tend to be close to the coastline, and we mostly are concentrated in the southern part of Australia. So South Australia, literally, Victoria, New South Wales, and then in Western Australia here. So the regions that we're going to talk about today are Barossa Valley, Clare Valley, Hunter Valley, and Margaret River, of course. Okay. Overall, the top varieties that you'll see in Australia, one of the most famous that you'll hear is Shiraz. Shiraz is just the same grape variety as Syrah that comes from France. In the United States, sometimes we like to make it sound fancy. We'll say Shiraz. And I was told from one of my Australian students that it's just pronounced Shiraz in Australia. So Shiraz, I'm not going to correct you, but I was told that, so I think I'll just stick to that. So this is definitely the leading wine in terms of production. It's much more fruit forward than French styles, and we'll do a side-by-side comparison in a couple slides. You'll also see a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon imported from Australia, and interestingly enough, some of the world's oldest Cabernet Sauvignon vines are in Australia. They're self-rooted, and they're very low producing, and they have a very systematic way of giving pedigrees to the age of grapevines in Australia, which is really cool. There's actually a famous block of Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. It was planted in 1888. 12 bottles of wine are made from it, and each bottle was put into hand-blown glass, and it was sold for $168,000 per bottle, which is insanity. But to be drinking a wine made from grapes that were planted in 1888 is just really cool, for sure. Okay, next we have Cab Sauv Shiraz blends. We also have GSM blends. We also have Grenache. So Grenache is a medium-bodied, ripe red fruit, some kind of cinnamon undertones. Then we also have Chardonnay. Chardonnay from Australia is known to be rich and creamy, typically. And then we also have Riesling, so dry and vibrant. And then also the surprisingly characters of cool climate style Rieslings. And then we also have Semillon. And the Semillon has been reported to be traditionally papaya, pear, and apple-like flavors. So a nice diversity, definitely a lot of influence from French grapes. And then we have a hint of German here too with the Riesling. Okay, so for our first region, we're going to talk about Barossa Valley. And this is in southern Australia specifically. And this region is classified as a Mediterranean climate. So it has cool, wet winters and warm, dry summers. Generally speaking, the region is very flat, and it gets very hot near the end of the growing season. So it maintains about 95 degrees. The flat region would make it very ideal for machine harvesting, so that works out very nicely, right? Generally speaking, the wines that come from this region are bold reds, and they have a long-standing wine heritage, right? So lots of generations of wine makers and grape growers here. So they have up to 6 generations, right? They tend some of the world's oldest vines, one believed to date back to 1843. These vines have very, very low yields, right? We have more than 150 wineries present in the Barossa Valley, and the top grape varieties that you would find would be Shiraz, Grenache, and Cabernet Sauvignon. Cool. And as you can see, I have Barossa right here. This little section here. Okay, so Shiraz, right? Shiraz, as we know, is Syrah, right? It originated from the Rhone Valley of France. There was some speculation at one time that Syrah came from the present-day Lebanon, but DNA testing has shown that it is indeed from France. So you win this one, France. You can have it. So Syrah is the original French name for the grape variety. The difference between a French Syrah and a Syrah from Australia, also known as a Shiraz, the characters of Syrah from France, we often refer to these in general speak in the sommelier world as old world, right? So these are typically wines that are lighter in body, so they have less alcohol, finer tannins, and just kind of leaner in general. So more acid, less alcohol. They don't get quite as ripe as they do in California and Australia. It's much warmer over here, right? Shiraz, on the other hand, Shiraz is specifically a name associated with Australia. However, there isn't anything holding back anyone in the United States from calling their wine a Shiraz. I think it is like an accepted synonym, but if they were to name it that, it would be expected from a consumer that it was made in an Australian style type of Shiraz. So the name originates in Australia. Now other parts of the world make the wine in a similar style and also label Shiraz. Okay. So what makes Shiraz different than Syrah is this is typically what's called a New World style wine. So this is much more intense, rich, riper aromas, fuller body, and higher alcohol. So very intense, bold wines, lots of fruit, lots of ripeness, and just a completely different style from what's in France, right? So here we have a diagram of what you would expect from Shiraz, from Australia specifically, and you'd have concentrated and bold flavors. They can be known to have spice, blue fruit, black fruit, pepper, and an earthiness component. Shiraz and many other reds can also have a very prevalent eucalyptus component as well, and that's because eucalyptus is so popular. It's grown all over Australia, so a lot of wines that come from there typically have a eucalyptus undertone, which can add a nice component of like menthol character to it. Some people really, really like it. I love it, but I love eucalyptus. If you don't like eucalyptus, then it might be something that you would need to consider, right? So here we have some flavors associated with Shiraz. We have chocolate, peppers, berries, tobacco, and coffee. Wine profile generally is high acid, body, and tannin. Medium dryness, so kind of medium sweet, not completely dry. And then alcohol can range from 13.5 to 15.5. Okay, so now we're moving from Barossa. We're going to move a little bit up north to Clare Valley. This is also in southern Australia. And compared to the Mediterranean climate and Barossa, Clare Valley is more continental, warm climate with cool afternoon breezes and cold nights. Here, a lot of the vineyards are planted at altitudes of 984 feet up to 1,700 feet above sea level. And just for reference, Placerville, where our class is located, is generally around just over 1,800 feet in elevation. Auburn is just breaching over 1,200 feet in elevation. So would be similar to some of the things that we can grow up here, even though we have a little more of a Mediterranean climate and theirs is continental, right? So there are over 50 wineries in Clare Valley, and it also is known for their world-class Riesling and their family-run wineries. That's what they're most known for. So top varieties you'd find in Clare Valley are Riesling, Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, and Merlot. So very fun stuff. Okay, if you were to get a Riesling from Clare Valley, the tasting notes, the general consensus is that it has a very high minerality and almost a steel-like component on these. This is very interesting. Riesling can develop a petrol character where it starts to taste kind of like fuel, and this is not necessarily a negative thing with wine. It is odd to people who are new to drinking wine, but the steel character is kind of like in the realm of that petrol component. So generally these are acidic and savory wines. There's some citrus component. There's typically orange blossom and crisp apple, right? Unlike Rieslings from other parts of the world, these wines from Clare Valley rarely have stone fruit character. So you're not going to find the like peach, apricot type of stone fruit character. You'll find more of the citrus, apple, and steel components, which is very interesting. So very different than Rieslings from Germany. Okay, now we're going to move east towards Hunter Valley, and this is in New South Wales, the state of New South Wales. There is a lot of award-winning wine and food in this area, which is very, very fun. It's also home to Australia's very first commercial vineyards, and this dates back to the 1860s, right? It's highly visited, and this land has also been inhabited by Aboriginal Australians for over 30,000 years. So probably a lot of really cool history to see, a lot of traveling, a lot of food and wine. It seems like a fantastic kind of tourism area, so highly recommend. Top varieties for Hunter Valley include Semillon, Chardonnay, and Shiraz, of course. Okay, so if we take a closer look at Semillon, for example, from Hunter Valley, that's one of their most iconic wines. It's what they're really known for. These vines were originally planted in 1830. This white wine has been reported to have flavors of grapefruit, papaya, lemon, pear, and apple. Typically, it's a lower alcohol and having a much brighter acidity, tart to sweet citrus, and these are lean wines that become richer in age. So overall, this would be a white wine that's very crisp, refreshing, fun to drink in really hot weather, right? So it could do really well in some parts of Australia when it gets very hot, right? And ultimately just a very good wine in general. You'll notice from the photo that this wine has a screw cap. And if you are kind of new to the wine world and are new to wines of Australia, Australia is one of the first ones to really adapt the screw cap on their bottles. For a long time, screw cap wines were considered like mass market, cheap, poor quality wines, but that's simply not the case anymore. Australia, and as we'll see in New Zealand, have definitely broke up the stereotype against screw caps. Lots of very, very high quality wines can be made with screw caps. The technology has changed. You can age wines in screw caps now, and you can just preserve a lot of freshness. You don't have to worry about cork taint because you're not using a cork, right? And you can very easily reseal a bottle with the screw cap. You can just put the cap back on, which is very convenient as well. So yeah, a little side note about screw caps in Australia. Okay, next we have Margaret River. This is in southwestern Australia, so we're moving all the way over to the west coast. As you can see in this little picture here, we're on the southern tip of southwestern Australia. This region has a cool maritime climate. The entire region touches the coastline, so very regulated by the ocean, very cool, very wet, right? A lot of winemakers are proud that the climate is very similar to Bordeaux. It's a highly respected wine region among all Australians and other folks outside of Australia. And this region specifically is noted for having the most European wine style in all of Australia. So these are classic wines, a very beautiful place to travel, lots of like fantastic scenery. It's a desolate region, but it's respected worldwide. So if you want to beat the crowds, that would definitely be something to look into. And the weather sounds fantastic. So definitely would be on my list for sure. So top varieties from Margaret River would include Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Sauvignon Blanc. All right. So if we were to focus in on Margaret River Chardonnay, the tasting notes for these wines typically include intense citrus and grapefruit acidity, ripe yellow peach, a savory salty spice character, and curry leaf, of all things, which I think is really interesting. So this kind of relates to green, terpene-like aromas. So you could think of like just kind of vegetal characters in general, anything that you cook with that is naturally green. It's very broad, but curry leaf is kind of a cool way to incorporate the spice character into a Chardonnay. So definitely something very different. I don't think we produce any Chardonnays that taste even close to these tasting notes in the United States. I haven't seen anything like this before. The savory, salty spice character is definitely something really, really interesting. But with that being said, if you see a bottle of this at Total Wine or at your local wine shop, it'd be definitely worth trying. So, Margaret River Chardonnay. Okay. One of the really unique styles of wine that is specific to Australia is something called Stickies. And I can't find this for the life of me in any of our local wine shops. You can find it in Australia, of course. I just don't think it's imported to the States here, unfortunately. So this is an Australian sweet wine. It's a general term used by Australians for their sweet fortified wines and their regular sweet wines. So it could be high alcohol or just kind of regular alcohol, but they are all sweet. The most exceptional of the Stickies are sweet fortified muscats and taupeques. And I have a link about that if you'd like to learn more about that variety. The wines tend to be brown in color and very thick and syrupy. They're made in very small batches. hardly ever exported, right? It's made very similar to a port, so it's harvested late. They stop the fermentation early by fortifying with natural grape spirits, and then they're aged for 10 to 20 years in neutral oak barrels. It's a long time to age wine, especially very sweet wine. Wine will take on flavors of toffee, brown sugar, molasses, fig syrup, honey, and miso, which I think is really interesting. So I had a student who was Australian. His dad lives in Australia, so we went to go visit him. Shout out to Blair. And he talked about the Stickies there. And yeah, unfortunately, we just can't bring them over. We can't get them over here. But they're very fun wines to try and very sweet, of course. So there's the Stickies for you. Next thing that's really unique and highlighted from Australia for the wine world is the influence of eucalyptus. So eucalyptus, of course, is a tree. It's highly flammable, which is a very big problem in Australia and other parts of the world where they grow. They're native to Australia, but a lot of these trees border the vineyards, and there is an oil that comes off this tree. It's called eucalyptol. The oil is named after its origin, the eucalyptus tree, right? It's oily. It's what gives it that really wonderful smell that you get in a lot of essential oils. You go get a massage or buy a new face cream. Like, a lot of things are scented eucalyptus. It's very refreshing, has almost like a mint-like component and freshness. But these oils blow off of the leaves of the tree, and they actually land on the grapes in the vineyard. And if you like eucalyptus, this is not a bad thing. It's not going to make anyone sick, but that oil does translate into the wine. So that eucalyptol, that compound, will get transferred in, and then the wine will contain that eucalyptol, and then it will have that kind of minty medicinal character. So that is very prevalent in a lot of their Shiraz and Cabernet Sauvignon wines. Not so much their white wines, which would make sense, right? Because we're pressing off the skins and then just fermenting the juice. So not too much influence of eucalyptol in that case. Okay, next we have official categories for old vines. So in the United States, we don't really have a legal system for old vines, right? We typically have just vines, and that's kind of it. We don't have a system yet. In Australia, they have a system, but they have very old vines, so they kind of have a tiered system. Old vine in Australia is at least 35 years. It's fully matured trunk and root system, so that's why it's considered old vine. It's fully matured. It's developed everything it needs to. That's old vine. Survivor vine is an antique vine. Those are at least 70 years old. Such vines have weathered significant fluctuation in climate, as well as social and political changes that have influenced Australia's wine industry, which I think is a really interesting way to name a vine for its age. So it's a survivor vine. Then we have a centenarian vine, which is at least 100 years old, right? So centenarian makes sense, 100 years. They have very thick and gnarly trunks. They're planted before irrigation or trellising were possible. So this would make sense why they have lived so long. Their roots have gone so far down. They've gotten so much access to water, and they've lived over 100 years. Then Australia goes one step beyond to the ancestor vine. So this is a vine that's at least 125 years old, which is insanity. These are considered living tributes to Australia's European settlers, which is crazy. Very crazy. So there you go. Categories for old vine. Next we have Australian wine laws. So Australia is very laid back as far as their wine laws go. They don't have strict laws like France. They have a system very similar to the United States. So they do have their laws set by the governmental agency Wine Australia. And they do contain geographic indications. Those are very similar to our AVAs or our American viticultural areas, right? So if you're going to claim a variety on your label, it must be at least 85% of that variety. If 2 or more varieties are listed, it must comprise of at least 85% of the wine. The leading variety must be listed first, right? So if it's a Cab Shiraz blend, the blend will have more Cab than Shiraz in it. right? Because that's the leading variety that's named. For the vintage to be claimed, 85% of the grapes must be of that vintage. And for the geographical indication, 85% of the grapes must come from that region. So unlike our tiered system, 100%, 95%, 85%, it's very straightforward, just 85% across the board. So it makes it very simple, very laid back system, but very straightforward and easy to understand. Okay, and that brings us to our learning objectives. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. As always, if something piqued your interest, I always encourage you guys to go out and learn more. Australia is a fantastic country with lots of fun critters and culture and interesting history and food and wine. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you can learn some more. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing you guys next time.